Eichenseer and I are going to talk a little bit about different ways to approach BIM and how to get started. And then we're going to hand things off to Joe Porostosky, who's going to talk about how OSU went on their BIM journey. And then we're going to leave a lot of time for questions and answers. So a little bit about myself. I'm one of the team leads here in our FM practice. I've been here for about going on 17 years now, working with facilities managers, helping them manage their facilities. And part of that is getting good data. It's a very exciting time to be in facilities management as digital twins and the digital world is evolving around us. Facilities data are becoming a lot more important. As we talk about, approaching BIM, and I like, again, graphic marketing gave me kudos to the marketing department. If you've got a big thing, you take it one step at a time. So we kind of broke it down into 4 steps. Number 1, start your meal planning. Look at your goals as to what you're going to do in putting your BIM plan together. Second, create your recipe. What's the approach? What's the right approach? And most importantly, what's the right approach for your organization? Because BIM can hold a lot of different levels of information, and there may be things that would be important to you that aren't to other organizations. Then you go and you gather your utensils. And we're going to talk today about a bunch of tools at your disposal as you start down this journey. And not to be missed, the last thing is important nutrients. As we talk about BIM, there has to be some benefits. So as you're looking at your plan, you've got to put together places where you can show successes because it's a large project to bite off on. From a beginning standpoint, if you kind of start your meal planning, putting together a BIM standard is no different than any standard IT process. Where you sit down and where you work on a system, you first ask, what data do you need? Then you'll be able to quickly identify, hey, I need building, floor, and room. I'm going to want to know some information on my assets. And that's where you start to get a more complicated as to how much information you want to know of those assets. And you just put down a list and you get together a list of the data that you need. The second thing you're going to look at is how is it collected? So where in the process does it happen? And as you do that, you're going to look at that list of the first part in a different light, and you might change it a little bit. The third question is the most important, which is how it is maintained. And I like this because usually when we get to this, when we're in a needs assessment, there's a very long list coming out of, what data do we need? It gets a little shorter when, how's it going to be collected? And then how's it going to be maintained is most important. And as you think about it in a facility, some of you that are here with us probably have facilities that you're managing that are 10, 20, 30 years old, some probably older, but as we talk about it, having a good plan for this is important. As we talk about different utensils that we have, you're going to need a BIM standard, and you're probably going to look at 2. You might want to have a BIM standard for new construction. And it's a very exciting time with what's happening in BIM and facilities right now. The AEC community, I'm constantly talking to firms asking, how do we work with our clients to give them better data? They've realized that BIM is a powerful tool. They're not used to talking to owners about data elements associated with assets. It's something that would never come up in a standard construction discussion 10 or 15 years ago, but things like that are important. So you want to leverage your AEC partners and work in your organization. There are tools that are out there available like IFC and COBE. You might want to have a plan to take your existing portfolio and go from a CAD 2-dimensional world into a 3-dimensional world. You might want to look at high definition scanning. Without going into details, it provides a point cloud, which is a picture of your facilities when you bring a scanner through, which you can also take measurements off of. And then another tool which recently came out, it was last month, Autodesk released a beta program for a product called Tandem. And I'm a big fan of Tandem, and I'm not telling you to go buy Tandem because it's not available. Tandem is a Autodesk approach to digital twins. And it's a plan that Autodesk is putting in place where they're focusing on the flow of data from conceptual design all the way through construction and handover, and how to get an owner better information in that process. And I've got a little link there at the bottom, but Autodesk has an active community that's involved in the development, and they have a beta program if you're interested in signing up. As you talk about your nutrients, you're going to have to look at benefits. And there's some really cool things that can be done in facilities with BIM data, and it's going to get cooler over time. Better data helps make better decisions. And as we move into, smart buildings and smart facilities and smart campuses, we're going to need to, have digital information of that, which will be contained in a digital twin, and your building information model is part of that. I recently did a project where I set up Apple indoor mapping for a mall down the street from me. I can't travel. We're doing some work with Apple testing things. And on the right-hand side of the screen, on the upper-hand side is an example of a work order system being used. And that's a model that was imported into a floor. And you can see the blue dot. That's physically where someone is. I tested it. It works. You can know where you are inside a facility within 3 to 5 meters. And as you look at this, and as IT comes, there's going to be all sorts of things we're going to be able to do with IoT devices. So that being said, I'm going to hand things off to Joe Eichenseer, who's going to kind of talk about how to get things started and different paths you can take.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I guess the big thing from this, as we're looking at that path, is trying to see how do we start, where do we go, and why do you want to pay attention to me? Well, I've been around in this level of the world for a while. Getting into that spot of saying one of those, how long have you been around? You add the plus at the end of things, and that certainly helps out with it. That being said, I've been with specifically IMAGINiT for about 22 years now, working on all sorts of things, and just the idea of technology and how do we leverage technology to improve business, whether that business is facilities management, building design, construction, you name it. There's all sorts of places where we have processes to go through to help integrate and make change and make things better. My role in the company is I get to work with everybody on the technical team that does anything related to buildings, whether we're talking about design, construction, facilities management, however it goes through there. So I'm regularly talking with people at all walks of life. It says there at the bottom of being an owner or AEC professional therapist. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's because we're getting out and talking to people and saying, here's what we can do. Here's how, ideas of how things can be made better. And as we're looking at all those things and applying it specifically to this idea of the BIM elephant, it's really figuring out the path. And as we're looking at the path and those things, there's some level of start with the end in mind. I don't know whoever came up with that phrase, probably hundreds of thousands of years ago, but going back to the idea of the recipe and things like that, if you know where you want to be, then you can turn around and identify what pieces of the recipe do you already have in hand, and what pieces of the recipe, what ingredients do you need to go out and get in some fashion or another, whether you're going to go to the store and buy it or you're going to grow it internally and get your own little home garden to grow the ingredients, wherever and however it needs to go. And then also needing to figure out how many people are on board with this journey alongside you. Because depending on the nature of your organization, maybe it is something that you can go alone and it's fine, and it may be even expected to go that way. But more often than not, for things that are going to be this big, we need to have some people to work with. We need to have some people to help us in that kitchen to figure out the recipe to take on this task. So first things first, as somebody says here, Stephen Covey was probably one of the first people with that phrase. Awesome. But where's the end? And as we're going for that, one of the things we have to think about is, what's your appetite for error or experimentation? How much do you need to absolutely, positively must get it right the first time? This is something completely mission critical, and if anything goes wrong, bad things are going to happen. It's not often that that's going to be the case, But we need to know that if it's going to be true or not. Because as we're looking at this and we're aiming for that target, we want to say this is the goal we're shooting for. We're human. Things are going to happen somehow or another, somewhere or another. Something's going to go wrong and you're going to miss the mark. Maybe not as bad as some of those arrows, but you're going to miss the mark. Thing is, though, if you took a shot at your target and maybe you did miss the mark, maybe you're guaranteed to miss the mark at least by a little bit, you're a heck of a lot closer after having taken that shot than you were if you never drew the string back, never shot the arrow to begin with. So knowing that we're going to be a little bit off somewhere, nothing in this world is perfect, but what's that margin of error that you're okay with? And how unique is your environment? As we get into the other things where the other Joe is going to be talking, how much of what you have is something where you can gain by the experience and the efforts that other people have put forth before you? How much of your environment is unique and you just have to kind of figure it out for your specific situation because of something that's out there? I'll tend to argue that there's a lot that we can use and borrow from others to make our lives better. Figuring out that right ratio, that'll go into your recipe. And how much time do you have? If we're saying, yes, we're gonna eat this elephant, we're gonna go one bite at a time, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z, and we need to be done by when? If there's no deadline out there, if you're anything like me, without a deadline, things tend to not get done. So heck, Gladys, our host here, is probably well aware that if she needs me to make sure I've got something accomplished on time, that there has to be a deadline. Otherwise, it just gets onto the back burner and things just don't happen for a little while. Yeah. So we need to think about these things and understand that. And then you get to that fork in the road. And this is actually literally a fork in the road. When I was looking for wonderful pictures to add in to get some graphics through here, this is Franklin, Kentucky, has a fork in the road. Pick your path, because we really need to take one or another. I would argue that there's really two things we have. We're going to eat the elephant, but are you going to do it? Maybe one way is in big bites. How are you going to be taking this out? Are you going to take a big chomp out of this? If so, we're talking about this being a pretty big family meal. It's going to be a lot of dishes, a lot of cooking that's going on. There's a lot of preparation time that goes into it. Think about it like the classic Thanksgiving meal or big family get together, whatever you want to call it. But there's a lot of time that'll go into investing into getting things done. A lot of it before everybody sits down at the table. So in the comparisons, there's a lot of work that has to be done on the back end. If you're going to do big bites, then it says, okay, we need to have an entire BIM standard up and running. We need to have templates and contents entirely up and running. We need to have a lot of people trained in what this environment is all about. We need to have the connections between BIM and our facilities systems all established and working. And there's all these things that have to be done ahead of time. And if that's the way that you need to roll, okay. But we need to take that into account, to be thinking about those things. There's going to be more investment in time and money up front to get everything in place. You're not going to be deferring it over the course of a year or years. It's right here. But I'll take this back and saying this is not eating the elephant all at once, and be careful that the elephant doesn't eat you. Because if we're grabbing and trying to get this all at once, make sure you've got the dessert. Make sure you've got the pieces. It's a big bite, but it's not everything all at once. You're taking it in big chunks. It's too big of a meal to do all at once. And if you try to do it 100% all at once, the elephant's going to eat you. The other option we have then is the small bites road. Think about it just finger food throughout the course of an evening, or however we want to go there from an analogy standpoint. But going with the smaller bites, you can often start with just the things you have on hand. What do we have today? Or if I don't have anything, what can I cobble together with what we have today? I've got some software. Well, what happens if we just make a building and see what comes of it? There's ideas that we can go here if we take itty bitty bite-sized steps. And you'll find yourself having made progress pretty quickly if you stay consistent. Because one of the things we've got through here is that if you're going to be taking the small bites, you have to make sure that you keep on taking those small bites. Don't take 2 small bites and then say, I'm done. You'll get hungry. It's not going to go well. But we've got to keep that momentum running so that we can continue taking a little piece at a time, a little piece at a time, and making some dramatic changes over the course of whatever that time range is that you have for this. And once you've figured out the little bites, what else do you need to get from the store to finish the process and start incrementally adding to it, knowing that at any point in time, you can change your path. It's not saying I'm going the small bites road and I must stay this way. There's no way I can change anything, or I've started off with big bites and I can't change to go to small. We can pivot, we can change. We can take something and we're halfway through investing in the big bites. It's going to be maybe painful to switch to small bites at that point, but we can. You're not locked into a specific path so long as you make sure that you know where that goal is. And maybe your goal changes too, your target's moving. So we shot to a target, it moved somewhere else. Okay, let's reorient ourselves, figure out our path forward, and get to that next step again. All of that to be said, when we're looking at how to get started, the different paths we can take, it's really of how big of a chunk do you want to be taking at once? What's your funding and time like to be able to tell what size of a bite or collection of bites you can take all at once? And to some extent, I'll argue regularly, if just get to a point to do something, get moving, get started on something. There's red tape and all sorts of stuff that we have to worry about and work through, but take that first step. You may be wrong. You're likely to have something off. Fix it, readjust, and take the next step again. Just get moving and pivot as things are going along. So with that framework in mind, let me turn this over to the other Joe.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, I'm Joe Porostosky. I am the Director of Facilities Information and Technology Services at The Ohio State University. Been here about 12 years. We've been deep into becoming a BIM-centric organization for about the last 10 years. My team consists of 3 different parts, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we do. We have the architectural services side of the house, handles all of our BIM initiatives, manages our building models, manages some of our CAD drawings that we still have out there, does all the room numbering for all of our projects across campus. We also have the GIS services team, handles all of our campus mapping. We manage all of the base map data for the university, lots of different layers of information. Does a lot of application development to visualize, collect our data, different types of data across campus, does building addressing, lots of custom maps and data analysis that we do on that side of the house. And we also have data services, handling space data and reporting, who's in what space, how is it being used, and doing all sorts of reporting to state and federal levels, internal reporting, again, data analysis. We also manage all of the record document archiving following projects. So we have a pretty wide breadth of responsibilities. We've been working with BIM, as I mentioned, for about 10 years, trying to move, as I mentioned, to a BIM-centric type organization. We've kind of put all these initiatives into, or these different projects, I should say, into one big initiative called the Buckeye BIM Initiative. Started with BIM for existing buildings, which has been our plan to move from AutoCAD to Revit for all of our facilities. Our current goal is to get up to 37 million square feet of Revit. That is not just CAD to Revit, that includes buildings that have come to us through the project process, which I'll mention here in a second. And so some of that square footage is included in that, but the vast majority of it is buildings that we've converted from AutoCAD to Revit. In addition, we are using BIM for design and construction. All projects over $4 million are required to use our BIM project delivery standard, which was released in 2015. And lastly, we're trying to take all this information, either whether we built it ourselves, whether we received it from a project, and find ways to use it in operations. We have a long way to go when it comes to operations. There are definitely some other organizations out there that have done a lot better job with that and are further along. One of our challenges is always scale when we're thinking about how we want to do it, but we've been able to get a lot of really good data out of our projects now that's allowed us to, from day one, have much more intelligent and informative asset information. And we're looking at next, how do we then bring in the graphical component? So we think about this as a continuum. We build our models, we maintain the data over the long term, we integrate new project information into our environment, and then we find ways to use that in operations. We've seen a lot of benefits from utilizing BIM, specifically from transitioning from CAD to Revit. in finding the improvements as compared to working in an AutoCAD world. One of those is just eliminating out-of-date plans and improved accuracy. We're walking every square foot of these buildings as we convert them, always finding something that was not caught over the years prior. And we try our best to keep AutoCAD up to date, but sometimes you miss a project, or a project happens, behind the scenes, and they don't tell anybody about it. And so this has really been a great opportunity for us to get everything up to date, make sure buildings stack correctly, which doesn't always happen in the AutoCAD world. We're including lots of great 3D data from windows and roofs and ceilings and heights, things that we just did not have in our AutoCAD plans. They were just simply 2D. We weren't trying to capture that type of information, but now we have a lot more of that information available. Working in Revit, we believe, simplifies updates to the floor plans following construction projects. It's a lot. There is definitely heft to working in a Revit environment, kind of at the enterprise level, but we found ways to mitigate most of those issues. And we find that the day-to-day updating of floor plans goes a little bit quicker in the Revit environment. These models are now intelligent. Moving from paper to AutoCAD was obviously a huge improvement, but at the end of the day, it was still just dumb lines on an electronic piece of paper. There really wasn't a lot of intelligence within an AutoCAD drawing. And within Revit, it knows what it is. It knows what a wall is. It knows what a door is. It knows what a space is. We can connect the models to other systems. So there's a lot more opportunities once you're in a model environment for looking at the data that's involved in these building models. It also serves as a foundation for the data sets. So if you look at that picture on the right, you're going to see some MEP. Now when we build our models coming from AutoCAD to Revit, they're just architectural models. They're simple architectural models. But we have lots of partners across campus. Specifically in this one, this is the College of Engineering. They've got a pretty forward-thinking facilities team over there, and they've hired some students who have gone out and done some laser scanning and are now linking in MEP models into our base architectural models. So our architectural models are serving as a foundation for additional data. And we have teams out there that are managing their own furniture and their own equipment. So there's lots of ways that Revit then becomes, or this base architectural model becomes, the foundation for future work. And one of the last benefits I'll mention is just this ability to communicate through visualization. This is obviously the one it's always most fun to talk about. It's always great pictures to show, but this is also some low-hanging fruit. Once you have models available, you can really start to begin doing work internally as an owner that in the past you might have sent out to an architect. For us, we have a little bit of a student design studio that is a part of our team, part of our extended team. And for instance, on the left there, that glass facade there doesn't exist today, but we want to do some early planning. Is this something that's feasible? Does it make sense? Do we want to go try to find some cash for this internally to make this real and go get an architect involved? But we can do it at a very, very low cost. Or things as simple as furniture layouts on the right. We do that quite often, and people really understand a 3D image a lot better than a 2D floor plan. They can understand how furniture is being laid out, how that office is going to look much more effectively when they're looking at a 3D rendering than if they're looking at a 2D drawing. And so we've seen a lot of benefits in being able to communicate design intent through imagery because we are really fully in a 3D environment. So how do we do this? And if you look at a very high level, we think there's really a 3-step process that we use to build each building. Now for us, we use students to do a lot of our modeling. It really doesn't matter if you're using students, if you're using consultants, if you're using full-time staff, you got to get some training. And for us, we obviously have to do this training every single year. And we spend the first week that they're with us doing pretty in-depth Revit training and then training to our process. And then we do training throughout the rest of the summer. So there's weekly training that gets them caught up on additional skills that they need as they progress through the process. But the first thing they're going to do is collect any record documentation, any construction documents that we have available to us, including the owner drawings that we have so far, the AutoCAD that we've been maintaining over the long term. And they're going to go out and they're going to field verify that building, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, and get all the rest of the information they need to build this model. Second step, they're going to build that model. It's obviously the most time-consuming part of this, and that's the part they're going to be really working through the model and building it on site. And then the last part is this process of checking the model. And I'll talk a little more detail about this in a moment, but the student in our case is going to be checking their own model using some tools, and then they're going to pass it off to the BIM coordinator, and she's going to run those same tools and do some visual checks. and she's going to pass it back if there's anything missing or incorrect. And that process is going to continue to iterate until she's happy with it. She gives it a thumbs up, and it gets published to our network, and it's now available for everyone else to use. So one thing that's been really important to us is making sure we had a very well-defined process. And this is important because we're using students specifically, but also because we have such a large number of buildings. We want very consistently built buildings. We learned a lot at the very beginning of this process, especially the first couple of years. In fact, we had to go back and make some adjustments to the first set of buildings we had done because we learned so much about how we should be doing it going forward. Now, we don't want to do that again, obviously, at this point, because it was a little bit of a painful process. And now we have 34 million square feet and about well over 500 models. That would be a much more challenging thing to do. But one of the things we really worked on a lot was this field verification process. Exactly how should we go out and do a field verification? So we can only do it once, hopefully, and we collect all the information we need in the most efficient way possible. For us, efficiency is important, but accuracy is important. And so we really beat up this process. We use 360 cameras. We talk about how to take measurements to ensure to verify the accuracy of the AutoCAD on a macro scale and also on a micro scale. We talk about how to take those pictures and where to take those pictures and what kind of information you're collecting. And this allows us to be much more effective in that field verification process than we have in the past. Now, obviously, the biggest part of this process is just how do you model it? How do you do it? This isn't necessarily teaching Revit. We've taught them Revit, and we'll continue to teach them Revit as they work for us. But this is really just about what you should be doing in what order. Sure, there's lots of screenshots. There's lots of showing you go do this, do this, do this. But the idea here is what is the best process that we've developed over the last 10 years to make sure that we're building the models, again, efficiently, but also accurately and effectively, and that it works best for us in the long term. And a great example of this in the next slide is the fact that we've really had to work on exactly how survey points, project-based points, Project North should work in our models. Now, to be honest, this was so hard for us to figure out. We ended up working with a consultant specifically on this one issue. We want to make sure that however we set this up, it would work correctly in GIS, because we push our models out into GIS. It would work correctly when you put it into BIM 360. It would work correctly when you put it in Navisworks. It would work correctly when you have adjacent buildings that are touching each other, and we want to link the two models together. We had a lot of places that these models ended up in, a lot of different exported types, and we needed to make sure we had settled on exactly how this should work. And that's one of these are the kinds of things that we've had to beat up over the years to get it to just exactly where we want it to be so it works most effectively. Now, I mentioned once they're done modeling, they're going to go into a checking process. At first, the first couple of years we did this, it was a manual audit. Our BIM coordinator would take 2 to 3 days at least looking at each model, visually looking around to see if the students had done the modeling process correctly. And it was pretty arduous, very frustrating work, and frankly missed a lot of stuff. It's a very difficult process to sit there and stare at a model for a couple of days to figure out if they modeled it correctly. In 2013, we introduced Celebri, which is an IFC-based model checking tool. So you're exporting out an IFC. It's not in native Revit any longer, but it allowed us to check a lot of stuff, from naming conventions to things like wall joins and other types of geometry issues that are very hard to catch visibly. And that took that 2 or 3 day process and got it down to about a day, day and a half on average for an average size building, with significantly better outcomes and accuracy. But it didn't check things native to Revit. And so in 2016, we started using the free Autodesk model checker for Revit and developed a rule set for us. And that allowed us to check a lot of things that were native to Revit, things that Celebri could not check. And so we use these two tools together along with a visual audit that is required for things that neither one of these check. And we've been able to get our checking process down to about a half a day on average. And so this has really been a big deal for us. It's allowed us to improve the accuracy of our models over time, but also it allowed us to be able to keep a good pace of building models too. If we're still using the manual audit, we likely would have to be going at a much slower pace so that we could keep up with the amount of modeling that the students were doing. Along the way, we also developed a number of tools. These are one of those things that incrementally kept building on it. We'd find something that we thought we could automate in our process, and then we would go out and get the tool written for us. Some of these are for the CAD to BIM process. Some of these are for the BIM to BIM process. When we bring in a model from the projects, clean them up and get them into our environment, make sure they match very closely the way that our CAD to BIM process creates a model, so that all the models are consistent. They might have more data, but they're consistent in the way they look and feel. But we also have two other tools that help with the ongoing maintenance. The closeout automation, every time we make a change to these models, we've got to export a bunch of different file formats to all sorts of different locations. And this allows us to do that quickly and without forgetting something. And it also closes up the model in a way that looks consistent by the next time it's being opened up. But the file archiver upgrader is also a big tool for us. This allows us to very rapidly update our models every year as we go from, every year you got to update the file formats for Revit. This was a really painful process before we had a tool written for this, because none of the tools out there quite work right and in the way that we have our environment set up, in the way that actually most owners would have their environment set up. And it was very time consuming. This now runs in the evenings. It takes a couple evenings. It really doesn't take a whole lot of our time. And it probably saves us, we think, around about 2 months worth of man hours at this point. So in some extent, I'm not sure we'd still be able to continue this program without some sort of tool that helped us with the upgrade process. It would just become too overwhelming. So we've learned a lot of lessons. I think doing this for 10 years, and having the opportunity to hear other people's stories along the way too, we've learned a lot about what it means to become a BIM-centric organization. And there's a lot of things, questions that you should be asking. And Peter already alluded to some of these questions, and making sure that, what do you actually need? What can you maintain? And so, it starts off with, what do you want to model? Just like he said, is question number one, but also, what are you actually going to use for planning and operations? Like, what is the outcome you're hoping to meet? Is it supporting planning, which is where we started, and now we're just getting more into operations too? What are the use cases? But what can you reasonably maintain? We would love to put a lot of stuff in these models, and we oftentimes have people asking us, can you put this or that in there? Sometimes students, when they start off, they get really excited and they start modeling all sorts of things, and we say, hey, you got to take that out. We just don't have the manpower to maintain those things long term. But we want to make sure our models are good quality models for the long run, and so we just simply can't put things in there that we can't reasonably maintain. Who's going to do the modeling? Is it going to be students? Is it going to be a contractor? Is it going to be an architect that's a firm you're going to bring in? Is it going to be full-time staff? These questions help you understand how you're going to approach the process. If you're using, in our situation, students, well, there's going to be a lot more training involved. If you're using staff, training is going to be much more front-loaded. They're going to get better and better at it as it goes, and so you won't need as much ongoing training for them. And how are you going to do the modeling? What is the process you're going to go about? Using scanning? Are you doing a process similar to ours? We're not using quite as much scanning. There's lots of different ways to approach it. And so how are you going to do it? In addition, partnering and collaborating has been super critical to us. We definitely have collaborated internally to make sure we understood what our customers internally and our stakeholders cared about. We did not want to build something that wasn't useful to them, or included data that wasn't helpful, or didn't include something that would have been helpful. But also externally, we've had a number of very, very good consultants that have been with us since day one, helping us think through what it means to become a BIM-centric organization. This is not something we could have done on our own. We needed people who understood how BIM works, what it means on construction projects, how it could be used to manage our existing facilities. And they really helped fill in a lot of those knowledge gaps and serve as people who can help us write software. And there's just all sorts of benefits that we received with partnering externally. But another thing that's really been critical to us is the standardization. I've mentioned that several times. Our process is highly standardized, whether it's CAD to BIM, whether it's BIM to BIM, it's a standardized process. Our templates are standardized. The families we have in Revit, they're standardized. We focused on representational families as opposed to buildable, because that's where we find the most bang for our buck and allows us to build the models quickly. Naming conventions are standardized. When you standardize everything you can about your process and the way the models are built, it allows you to do some of the automation things that I already talked about, whether you're using plugins, whether it means the model checkers, whether it just means that every time you go into a model, it looks the same, so you're not trying to relearn how this particular model is set up. This is saving us time. And the last big I would say, practical tips or lesson learned is effective training. Obviously, I mentioned we have to train our modelers every year, which may or may not be your situation, but we have to onboard those folks. But also, we're doing lots of training with end users. We've just spent all this time building all these great models. We want to make sure that people can actually use the models. So we're doing different types of training, different levels of Revit training throughout the year for anybody who owns an Autodesk license here at Ohio State. And we also do things like AutoCAD. We want to make sure they have it too. And we're always kind of looking at our training offerings and figuring out how to do it. We consult with departments as they want to start using Revit in their own environments, in their own processes. So training is critical as a step to allow your organization to use these models to the most effective way. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Peter.
Okay, thank you, Joe. So I remembered why I couldn't see the poll before. I forgot that when you present the poll and you're the presenter, you actually don't see it. So I'm going to launch the poll again, which is in process. And the question is, in what stage of BIM adoption is your organization? And had we done this earlier correctly, it would help us because we would focus things a little bit differently. And I'll just give a couple seconds for answers to come in. I think it's Alex Trebek or was Alex Trebek. I need the clock that he had. So I'm going to close the poll. And I'm going to share the results here. And we can see about 39% of you are researching, 48% are developing plans. Way to go, we're impressed. 13% of you are implementing approved plans. So I hide the poll now that I know how to work this. So we wanted to show you a little case study of a federal client that we worked with. We can't use their name exactly, but they told us we could talk about it because they can't condone one way of doing things versus another. But we engaged with a federal client that wanted to do a pilot to see if there was value in models in their organization and how could they be used. And we followed the BIM switch process with them. And we picked a complex 5-story building that was part of their portfolio for 2 reasons. A, we wanted something that was kind of harder, or they did. And B, that building was representative of some of the different functions that they had in their facilities. And where we started, they had no standard, they weren't ready, didn't know what they wanted to do. And going back to Joe Eichenseer talking earlier about different level bites, the thought here was, hey, let's do a pilot to see if it works versus setting up a standard. And the nice thing by leveraging BIM switch to do a pilot, they didn't have a standard to start with. We came in with a template for them to start. And by leveraging that standard in 8 weeks, not only could we have a base standard set up for this organization, but we were able to work with them to migrate that one building from CAD to BIM. At the same time, there was another thing they wanted to evaluate was point clouds. And I had mentioned there earlier, and Joe's touched on them, but digital data in a picture format is very powerful, and you see it more and more. And we're to the point where the equipment used to gather this is getting smarter, and then the recognition based on things like this is getting smarter as well. So we scanned the facility, and then we did kind of a proof of concept and linked the scan and the BIM to some of the facility management systems that this organization was used to see, hey, how can we leverage this from a space and asset management system? And when I went into it, we had a list of wins that we thought we were going to have. And the biggest win was something I didn't even realize, or nor did the entire team we came in. We were doing an internal presentation, and we showed, how we could look from, a room to a scan to a model to a database type view. And one of the people in the room was involved in emergency preparedness. And he said, wait a minute. He said, you've got details now of every room because you've scanned them in a picture. You've also got this in a database, and you've got this in a model. And he said, for emergency preparedness, we need to know if something happens to this facility, we need to be able to replace it very quickly. And that gave them a very powerful ROI that we weren't looking for. And when we finish the project, which is we currently at a pilot, we did this last year and we're at a stop and wait and see, and they're thinking about the next part of taking the bite. I said, hey, if there was one thing, that came out of this, what you say, and that they came back and said that BIM switch was a very efficient process. And this is an example of a very specific approach. So from next steps, we brought the cute elephant back. You want to develop a game plan. So if you're part of the 39% that are still researching, spend some time evaluating, are you ready? Then sit down and plan and say, hey, where can BIM add value? One of the nice things about BIM standards is organizations post them as they generate them, because in order to get BIM data from their AEC partners, an organization has to tell them how they want it. So you can see what different organizations do. Define your path for your implementation. Back to Joe Eichenseer, talking about meal planning. I love the fork in the road. I personally would have gotten something from the Muppet movies, but marketing probably would yell at me because I'd be copyrighting an infringement. But what's your path and where are you going to go? And then you're going to roll it out. And remember that as you roll out your BIM standard and you start gathering BIM data to make sure that that data is being kept up to date over time. Joe talked before about the value of engaging your AEC partners, and I can't specify that enough. Joe Eichenseer and I spend a tremendous amount of time working with AEC professionals and owners to have discussions about important elements of BIM. And it's just a paradigm shift. It's not that it's rocket science or anything, but traditionally someone in design and construction worked with people, outside organizations, to make sure a building was built on budget, on time. And now they've got to think, hey, not only can be on budget, on time, but we can get an electronic model about this to put into our facilities world to help better manage the facility. And if you look at the cost of a facility, depending on how you look, the metric is anywhere from 65 to 85% of the cost of a facility isn't in design and construction. It's in the maintenance phase of that facility. And if you can make small wins there, it's a big deal. And then as you go, just repeat.